Welcome back to Business and Politics. We're talking to Dr. Von Einsiedelel. Sir, I was wondering, how do we move forward? Are there new policies that we should be considering? Are there existing laws and policies that maybe we should be revisiting, make sure that they're enforced better? What's your view there?
There is during the earlier years, during the older Marcos era, there was what was known as the integrated area development approach.
Okay.
And it was applied to agriculture.
Agriculture, okay.
Agriculture, yes. It to me made a lot of sense, because when you're talking of agricultural production, you need markets.
Okay.
You need to be able to transport your produce
to the consumers,
from where it was produced to where it can be sold or exported, etc. Or it can be processed and then exported.
Right.
So you talk about rural and urban. Now, one of the things that kind of constrains that kind of a mindset is that there seems to be a segregation between the two.
I see.
There are specialists in urban development and there are specialists in rural development, and very often they don't talk to each other.
I see.
Okay, so the connection, the synergy between the two gets lost.
I see.
Okay, and so you have...
That's so interesting, okay.
You have the problem of, you know, the agriculture people concentrating on productivity of the farmers, but how do you transport your product?
How do they sell their goods, right?
How do they sell their goods? Where is it processed? And, you know, how do you transport it? And so there is a need for that kind of an integrated kind of an approach, which somehow has not appeared to be given that much importance. Okay. Supposedly, we have a regional development planning system.
The RDCs, right?
The RDCs, okay? And that's something that the RDCs supposedly should be looking into. Okay. Now, I'm not too up to date on how the RDCs have been performing. But
it seems a little spotty. Some are doing better than the others,
From what I understand, NEDA supports the RDCs, It serves as the secretariat. And I think the regional director, the NEDA regional director, acts as the co-chairman of the RDC. The other co-chairman is a governor, one of the governors of the province. They're supposed to come up with the local governments that comprise the region are supposed to come up with the project proposals, and it's supposed to address the bigger picture of what the region requires. So the interconnectivity, the synergy between different kinds of projects is supposedly tackled through that kind of a system. Now, I think that is something that needs to be strengthened. I think it's something that requires a little bit more of scenario building, scenario forecasting, rather than simply just responding to, binaha itong area na ito, so we need flood control, solution here and a solution here. You know, it becomes like a bandage kind of an approach. When what is necessary is a kind of like a major surgery. You know, so
or as one of our columnists put it, stop thinking short term.
That's right. That's right. It's long term and comprehensive. And of course, it's a little bit kind of not so easy to convince the politicians, who, particularly mayors, who have a short term of office. I mean, the 3-year term of office of mayors is a kind of a constraint. Because, you know, the first year, the mayor just gets to learn what the problems are. The second year, he starts to prepare the plan. And the third year, he campaigns again for the next election. So he doesn't get anything done. So, you know, and it gets repeated every 3 years. So I think that's something that also needs to be looked into, and it's related to governance.
Right.
It's very much part of governance.
What are your views on the Mandanas ruling? Because in the context again of smart city development, it seems like the local governments will have more resources, but of course the impact will depend on how they spend those resources, right?
Aside from how they will spend the resources, it also depends on what the central government agencies will be doing.
Okay.
Because a number of the functions that are supposedly being devolved were devolved earlier and then taken back.
Right.
In agriculture, in education, etc.
Yes.
In health. And so there is this, the local governments were required to come up with their plans in anticipation of the enforcement of the Mandanas ruling.
Right.
Okay? They were waiting for the national government agencies to send them the plans of the national government so that they could...
they're coordinated.
They can coordinate.
Yeah, I see.
But the national governments did not send them the plans.
I see.
Okay? And the local governments were kind of under pressure from DILG to already come up with the local plan. So they made a lot of assumptions on what will happen.
Right.
And so they've come up with their own plans. Now, they said they'll adjust it as soon as the national agencies' plans come down.
I see.
I'm not up to date on whether what has happened to that. Okay, but it sort of has forced the local governments to think about the services that they provide.
Okay.
And the amount of money that they have to use in the delivery of those services.
Right.
Which, in a sense, is good.
Right.
Because there has been a tendency in the past where the local governments, because the budget of last year has so many items, this year let's just repeat the same and increase it by 10%. I mean, without really analyzing, do you really still need that budget item now?
Right.
So I think the Mandanas ruling kind of has forced the local governments to think a lot, more better of how the services are that they will deliver.
You haven't mentioned Singapore, and as a possible model for the Philippines. And I've heard for the past couple of decades now that some areas of the Philippines, Subic, for instance, at one point tried to be maybe the next Singapore. Do we have candidates for becoming that? Maybe if not a Singapore, like an Incheon that you were describing a while ago. Are there any cities or clustered areas that you think stand at better chance of becoming a smart city in our lifetime?
Well, it's good that you mentioned Singapore because I was just reading an article recently where the top 7 cities in the world that are considered smart, Singapore is the top.
Wow.
Is on top of the list. And it mentioned a number of things that Singapore is doing.
Right.
Okay? And one of the things that Singapore is doing insofar as smart city technology is concerned is focused on the delivery of health care.
I see.
Okay? For example, they have the system where patients have this wearable that monitors the health of that patient.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Even though the patient is in the patient's home.
Right.
So the hospital is able to monitor that patient
remotely,
24/7.
Right.
Okay. And so that's one of the technologies that they've adopted. They've adopted it for traffic management. They've adopted it for waste management. They're building an entirely new city. It's a little bit outside of the downtown Singapore, but it's an entirely new development, which is vehicle-free. It's supposed to be just electric vehicles that's going to operate in that area. Now, the thing about Singapore is that it is a city as well as a country.
Right.
And therefore, you need a visa.
Right.
I mean, to go to Singapore. Okay, so Filipinos don't need one. Okay, but it's being a country. Okay, with just one city. Okay? So you get the national policy and the city policy as one, okay? Which makes it a lot easier. Now, in our case, the national government is different from the local governments, and we have a lot of local governments. And so there is that kind of very often that disconnect where the national policy does not get actually implemented at the local level, and the needs of the local level are not transmitted effectively to the national. So you have laws that require the local governments to comply, but then the laws don't actually apply because of the circumstances. Like, for example, the Ivatan houses in Batanes, okay, were damaged by the recent typhoons. Okay? Now, these houses use thatch roofs, wooden roof frames and kogon grass for the roofing. That's disallowed by the National Building Code. Okay. Because it burns.
So that's the disconnect,
But you know, the Ivatan people have been using that for I don't know for how long.
For centuries, probably.
For centuries. And they were complaining that they are now being castigated by DENR because
for being non-compliant.
For not complying because they're cutting kogon. So what they did was they allocated some public land and they're growing the kogon.
I see.
So they're now harvesting the kogon that they use for replenishing, for repairing the houses that got. Now, they got the concession from the DPWH that they can use the kogon for repairs, but they cannot build it for new ones. So I was saying, why not? Why not? You know, they said, well, maybe because it's not fireproof. Well, you know, but there are ways of fireproofing it. Okay, so anyway, that's an example.
Funny but tragic,
Yes, it's a kind of a tragic disconnect between what I can understand the policies of DENR, you know, protecting the environment.
Sure.
But when you have something that has been in practice by a local government,
it's part of the culture.
Part of culture.
Could boost tourism.
That's right. So you know.
So going back, is there a candidate that can be a smart city? I mean, you mentioned Clark. Is that our best bet? I mean, or is Quezon City or Makati or Bogo? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I would imagine that if we were to think about the costs of the smart city technology, okay, it's the more affluent cities that can afford it.
I see.
Okay, now Quezon City, for example, Makati, for example, Iloilo City,
BGC or Taguig,
you know, the highly urbanized cities appear to be in a much better position because of the fact that they can afford it. Okay, the poorer ones, you know, I've worked in a number of poorer municipalities after Typhoon Haiyan, Yolanda. And it's very difficult working with the 4th to 6th class municipalities because they simply just can't afford. They don't have the income, even just for simple repairs, and so they're very reliant on external assistance. You know, after Yolanda, when I went there, and Yolanda happened in November, and I was there in January, and you know, I couldn't land in Tacloban because the airport was not operational yet. So I had to travel from Cebu by ferry to
Tacloban
to Baybay, and then by land. And along the highway, people were putting signs pointing to the mountains, and they said, "We also need help."
Wow.
You know, these were towns that were not along the main highway that were asking for help. And these are the poor towns, you know, that simple infrastructure requirements they cannot afford. So this, I think, is a major concern insofar as promoting smart city technologies, simply because of the cost.
Wow. Well, Dinky, it's been fascinating talking to you. I learned a lot. I wish we had more time, and we may have to schedule a part 2 of this interview. But thank you very much for the time you gave to Business and Politics. But before you go, you want to say something to our audience before we go?
Okay, well, one of the things I want to emphasize is what I mentioned earlier about land readjustment. We don't have presently the means of achieving integrated urban development. Meaning, when we say integrated, we're able to do a 15-minute city, where essentially the essential services that any household requires can be within a 15-minute walking or cycling or public transport distance from where people live. Okay? Now, if we had a land readjustment legislation, then that would facilitate the consolidation of land and therefore provide the economy of scale that the private investors would be interested in to partner with the government. Because if the private sector, without that kind of a facility, the private sector is left on its own to assemble the land in a commercial way, which makes it very expensive. Yeah. And therefore, it kind of rules out the provision of affordable housing, for example, and services for the lower income families. So this is something that I would like to push further, because I think it will help a lot. Solve a lot of problems.
Wow. Well, again, thank you very much. I think you're the only one talking about that, but hopefully with this program will help you amplify that message. Thank you again. And I'd like to thank our viewers watching this program. I'd like to thank those watching the replay. And of course, thank you to Pastor Paul Kibuloy for making this program possible. This has been Business and Politics. I'm Dante Kling Ang, and I will see you next week.